Hello, hello everyone. Very glad to be here this afternoon after this wonderful session in the morning with the panel number 3. So in the afternoon we will be talking about caring for future worlds, sustainable development goals within spaces and places of heritage. And in our panel we will be honored to have three speakers: Claire Smith, Madhura Dutta, and Sofia Labadi. Let me have a look if there. I see Sofia, and I believe that we have to wait. Actually, it was supposed to start in 20 minutes, so we may have to wait some more minutes to have our panelists fully in the panel. I have to deliver a message from Amra Hazim who was having a very bad week last week because of health reasons, so she could not participate as planned. But I'm pretty much sure that she will be following this in a way or another. I mean, indirectly in the next talks. Just to let you know about the remaining part of the day. After this panel, we will have a session on questions and answers. So I invite, the crowd to contribute by giving questions or putting questions in the Q&A section. And then we will have another panel number 5, which will be a roundtable talking about the call-out competition that was launched already in 2020 for the presentation of some case studies on the topic. Actually, let me see if our panelists are in. Certainly the debate that we have this morning anticipated what we are doing today. So maybe if you don't mind, I will just give some information about the contents of the session we are going to have. A more extensive, I would say, description of it, of course, can be found on the website of this meeting. Any case, taking back, by the way, is what has been already said this morning. Site owners are confident of the positive development impact of listing. In this respect, the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals by the United Nations in 2015 expanded on 17 goals, and cultural heritage was perceived as highly contributing to all of them. Nevertheless, the challenges of economic pressures, I would say climate change, mass tourism, and pandemics, we may add, may affect sites, their indigenous communities, kingships, clans, and nurturing communities as well, ecosystems, as we have seen, and of course, the sense of place from space, thus reducing the impact, the potential impact of heritage to sustainable development. So under these premises, this panel looks at the pressures generated by the listing and how they affect the sense of place, in the awareness that too often those who list are not those who live, that those who benefit are not those who care. It aims at feeding the international debate on how to create local development policies with holistic visions to address the sustainable development goals and make them drivers for the eventual, I would say, positive change that we need. And we were expecting also in the session of the morning. It expects to deepen the knowledge on how sustainable development goals can help sustaining local values with the help of all actors. So this is the basis for our debate today. Let me see if there are all the panelists. We should maybe wait some more minutes. I don't know, I invite maybe, the people that are already in to give some maybe insights on that. Maybe create the link of what has been said this morning. We have seen that in the presentation on the keynote speech of O'Donnell, Professor O'Donnell this morning, she already introduced quite extensively the contents of the Sustainable Development Goals. It was, in any case, debated also in the panel, and we have seen that there is need, in any case, to go beyond, I mean, more structured, the structured, I would say, political boxes that we have at the moment, and maybe find new narratives on this regard. But it's good, I think, that we introduce them lightly here. So Claire Smith is Professor of Archaeology at the College of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences in the Flinders University in Australia. She was President of the World Archaeological Congress. She decodes patterns in human behaviors to interpret the past, understand the present, and envisage the future. The materials she analyzes range from rock art, statues, and monuments to memorials, graves, and social media. She worked with the Aboriginal community of Barunga in the Northern Territory and with Gadjuri people in South Australia. She's currently leading the Indo-Australian project on indigenous cultural heritage as facilitator for the Sustainable Development Goals. Madhura Dutta is director at Banglanatak.com organization, a 20 years old social enterprise working towards inclusive and sustainable development using culture-based approaches. She leads international collaboration and research initiatives. She has over 18 years of global work experience, including UNESCO, All India Artisans and Craft Workers Associations, and various CSR. Professor Sofia Labadi is a professor at Heritage at the Kent University, and she holds degrees in Heritage Studies and Political Sciences. She's currently an Arts and Humanities Research Council Leadership Fellow, and she is researching why heritage was marginalized from Sustainable Development Goals. And this, I expect, will be part of a presentation today. Much of Sofia's research, that is, by the way, Sofia is one of the leading heads of our initiative in genders and diversities, was focused on heritage sites and museums. It can address some of the most pressing global challenges, including social justice, gender equality, and sustainable development.
Okay, thank you very much, Marco, for the introduction.
Thank you.
And so hopefully the panelists can join us. As Marco said, and also the keynote by Patricia, we've heard that the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted by the UN in 2015 to address some of the key challenges, such as to eradicate poverty, hunger, or to reach gender equality. So these are quite necessary goals in some sense, although they've also been criticized for not challenging enough the structural injustices that we are living in. So I have attended a number of conferences on heritage and the Sustainable Development Goals recently, and participants focused on the protection of the material aspect of heritage. I think that's slightly problematic because it is a restrictive way of looking at heritage. And I think this is a result of Sustainable Development Goals 11.4, which aims, and I quote, to protect the world's cultural and natural heritage. I think this restricted understanding of the links between heritage and the SDG is problematic because heritage is can be seen in every single Sustainable Development Goals. I think that the wider issue, the wider values of heritage really needs to be recognized. And at ICOMOS, which is the biggest NGO on heritage, there is a strong belief that heritage understood in its broader sense as including cultural and natural heritage, intangible and tangible manifestation, can play a key role in addressing the SDGs. Not only SDG 11, but each and every SDG. And this belief that we need to streamline heritage within the SDG is the reason why I led a new project for e-commerce, and we wrote an e-commerce document called Heritage and the Sustainable Development Goals, Policy Guidance for Heritage and Development Actors. So I will put the link in the chat later on, and we can have a discussion about that publication. That publication was published on 15th of March, so it's extremely recent. It was the product of 2 years of work, and it was written in collaboration with 4 wonderful women, which I will cite. It was Ege Yildirim, Ilaria Rossetti, Francesca Giliberto, and Linda Shibati. And this document benefited from consultation with more than 70 experts from e-commerce. So this policy guidance has the role of advocating the need for heritage to not only be considered as just being about the protection of the tangible or even intangible aspect of heritage, but moving beyond that to look at, gender equality, injustices, as we've discussed a lot today, which is SDG 11, SDG 12, reducing hunger, poverty, etc. So it's very much around the policy evidence is very much around how heritage can make a positive contribution. So if we are moving beyond what we've discussed already today. But of course, as we've seen today, heritage is also a complex issue, and it can do harm in some cases. And in some cases, heritage is not at all aligned with some of the principles from, the Sustainable Development Goals. It's not at all aligned with, human rights principles. And this was a key aspect I wanted in the document that we've written. For instance, so SDG 1 is about eradicating extreme poverty. And we clearly indicated that many groups suffer from social and economic exclusion because of their culture and heritage, and that needs to be addressed. Again, for SDG 5, which is on gender equality, we indicated that many aspects of heritage, including access to and management of heritage, as well as traditions and practices, can be considered as stereotyping and discriminating among genders. This form of heritage should be transformed if considered locally as perpetuating discriminatory practices. End of quotes. But we also had a positive outlook, and we highlighted how heritage, as I already said, can be a way of addressing marginalization and discrimination. To take the example of genders, again, we recommended to highlight the many public and non-stereotype role of women and other genders in different periods of history to address discrimination and the invisibility of women. In addition, we provided some long examples which can be replicated. For instance, to illustrate Sustainable Development Goal 2 on ending hunger, we use the example of the cultural landscape of the honey rice terraces in China, which is a traditional and resilient farming system that can address changing climatic conditions and can provide sustainable food and water to local communities. And there are similar farming landscapes around the world that can be better protected and promoted, and our guidance can help with that, we believe. Excuse me, can you put me on screen, because I'm just a little, as far as I can see, on the port? No? Sorry. Okay, don't worry. I was talking about being on full screen, but it doesn't matter.
You are, Sophia, you are.
Oh, am I? Oh, I didn't see that. Okay, sorry. I could only see a small part of me. I find that very disturbing. Thank you. We also move beyond Eurocentric approaches to some concepts. For instance, we use the term heritage to move beyond the false dichotomy between nature and culture and tangible and intangible heritage. We discussed that a lot today. And I really think that we need to move beyond that dichotomy. And one of the ways to move beyond that is simply, for instance, to use heritage. And I really don't want, for instance, to use these new terms such as nature culture, as we discussed this morning, because I think it's just a continuing to promote that dichotomy. In addition, we try to move beyond the binary definition of genders as men and women, which actually is something that is promoted by the UN. And we try to include other genders. That is very much something that e-commerce is very into at the moment. We also try, but that was quite difficult, to move away from a conception of heritage as unchanged tradition, which I think is really problematic. And we discussed that a lot in some of our webinars, in particular webinar 3 this month. And this is also, but I think it was really difficult to do that because I think it's part of the DNA of heritage. And finally, we didn't use at all the term authenticity, as you've heard this morning. This is a term that I have many issues with, and we thought that it was better to move beyond that term. So I think in a lot of ways, that document is trying to address some of the key issues with the system and some of the key issues that we've already discussed over the past 2 days. So I want to finish with some issues I've had with that document, although I've written it. It is very aspirational and idealistic as a text, and I think that is quite important because as human beings, we need bigger goals and we need aspirations. And we've heard a lot over the past 2 days about solutions, and I think it's important to think about, solutions. And it's also important to recognize that heritage is a weapon for well-being, to address violence and discrimination. And if we read texts like, I don't know, Frantz Fanon, The Rage of the Earth, he's very much talking about the power of culture. However, as we've seen for the past 2 days, the reality is much more complex than what we explain in the policy guidance. And it's just what I see in a lot of policy documents. For instance, we mentioned a lot the need to recognize the knowledge and practices valued by indigenous people and local communities. However, these aspirational statements do not take account of unequal power relations, stereotyping, discrimination, and marginalization, as we've talked a lot about during the 2 days, and they do not explain how to address these issues. And as I've already said, we also try to move beyond the stereotyping of indigenous people and indigenous life as being necessarily good and as respecting nature, because this is continuing the Eurocentric stereotyping of indigenous people. But that was quite difficult to do so. And I think there's this kind of almost, the broken disc of repeating that, indigenous people are good, indigenous people are great, etc. But it's so complicated to have them on the table, to participate meaningfully in discussion. And that's really, really difficult to move from text to reality and to find meaningful ways of moving simply beyond lip services, paying lip services to, the participation of indigenous people. Besides, in the text, we sometimes consider heritage as the panacea to address every contemporary challenges, whilst we did not take enough account of its discriminatory dimension, and that we have been discussing all through yesterday and today. So to use the term that was used this morning, we romanticized a lot heritage, and I think that was maybe problematic. So I think the next step is to take this text, which is aspirational and positive, and see where are the issues preventing such approaches to be realized, and look at possible ways to address these issues. And this is what I'm going to do next. Thank you very much. And I look forward to hearing your views about the policy guidance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia. It was very interesting. I think it was really grasping also what we have said this morning, and your suggestions about, I mean, the dichotomies as well as the concept of authenticity, I think should be on the table. I mean, I agree with you, and I believe that some of the panelists will have not only, I mean, the crowd, much to say about that. So I have seen that in the meantime, our panelists joined us. So Professor Claire Smith and Madhura Dutta.
So the project that I'm working on really, and have been for a couple of years now, I'm working with Alok Kumar Kanungo and Nisant Choksi at the Indian Institute of Technology, Gandhinagar. And we're looking at heritage as a facilitator of the Sustainable Development Goals, not as a facilitator of development, but as a facilitator of the goals. And I'll end up talking about the new ICOMOS document towards the end of this. This is a graveyard at Brunga in the Northern Territory where I have worked since 1990. Every year, sometimes all year, sometimes 5 months in a year, sometimes 2. I have very deep relationships with people there. Okay, so I wanted to talk just briefly about the failure of World Heritage to benefit Aboriginal people in my country. So Kakadu is National Park, it's World Heritage, and this is a recent thing. You can see it was 22nd of February, and there's an article, I can send the links to people, but it's really the owners. There are whole lots of things that are happening that aren't being maintained. Water crossings aren't being maintained. Information centres are closed for a year, and the traditional owners, the Aboriginal traditional owners, are very frustrated because they feel they have a World Heritage site. There should be a lot more benefit to them and a lot more support in managing that park. The other one is Uluru, who's we're talking about, who's at, that's, some people might know it as Ayers Rock. It's a really big, enormous big rock in the middle of the country. And the Anagu traditional owners there, but they only get 25% of the money that's spent there. So so the question there is who benefits, where does the rest of the money go? Mostly they're not employed, even though there's tourism, a lot of tourism there. They're mostly not employed. And so the question is, why not? Why are people still poor? We have the same situation with mining throughout my country. We have great mining happening, and the Aboriginal communities 30, 40 years down the road, still children are uneducated. People, a lot of people don't have jobs. People are still very, very poor. So these are the kind of core questions that we're thinking of. And I'm saying that the community that I'm working with, Brunga, if we're talking about development, and we are, seriously, we have some stuff we're doing, but what is sustainable development and do we want it? So the things that we're thinking about are, well, people think, we don't want to be like Morninga, we don't want to be like you. We don't really, you know, people, we don't really like white people that much. You know, there's a horrible history of colonialism in my country, but also white people value different things. So we value property above people, pretty much more than Aboriginal people do. Aboriginal people think we're selfish. We keep all our money to ourselves instead of sharing with our family. We're cruel to our animals. You know, we have a dog on a chain or by itself instead of with its family. So they're not, they are quite, they don't want to be like us. They don't want to be us. So that's one of the the core issues is, you know, if this development is going to try and turn people into another kind of people, well, they don't want it. So our core research problem, the one that we're looking at in India and in Australia, is to try and identify really concrete actions that can take on the capacity of heritage to facilitate implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Not sustainable development, that's too hard, but the Sustainable Development Goals, we can handle that. We've got sub-aims, which are develop a new model, which is we're working on, new digital technologies, and the protocols to protect Indigenous cultural heritage. And I think the lady before was saying, in her community, people won't write things down because it becomes fossilized and it becomes, you know, the authentic interpretation, and that's smart. That's really smart, and that's what happens too in community. It's an oral history community, and there are things that people just don't want written down because it's really interpreted in context by people who have the power to interpret it. And so by writing it down, you, in a way, you disempower yourself. Okay, so these are the goals, and I'm just going to talk about a particular project we're running and how it goes to, I think I've got goals 1, 3, and I think a 5 in this one. Okay. You may not believe it, but in 2019 and in 2020, when it should have changed, it nearly changed in 2020, but it didn't. And in 2021, the vast majority of graves of Aboriginal people in remote communities are not recorded in any kind of register. So in the cities, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in the city die, they're buried in a city grave, there's a record of where the grave is. In the communities, there's no record, and you go in the ground, and if people don't have money for a headstone, they have to remember where you are. And of course, after a few years, you can't remember, was that old lady here? I thought she was 2 along from the fence. No, she was 3 along from the fence. You sure? No, I think she's in this other row. You forget. And having worked in that community for 30 years, I forget where people who I loved are buried. So it's a real problem for all of us. So everybody has a relative lying in an unmarked grave. That's a serious problem. There's a new cremation bill that went through, which actually got scuttled because it wasn't culturally, because it was going to damage culture more than it was going to help, really. This is just telling you a little bit about traditional burial practices there. So this is the hut that I live in on the right-hand side. Obviously, I mostly live outside. I live in a tent several months of the year. And a member of the family that I'm very close to, entwined with, died. And so they built this bark shelter next to our hut. And you can see there's a sheet there, and you can go in the night before the person dies, sometimes for a couple of nights, and you can talk to them and kind of keep peace with them one-to-one. And this is the grave for that person, and you can see everyone dresses in black and white. This is a Christian community mostly, but there's still a lot of Aboriginal traditional beliefs that are intermingled with that, really. And that's his burial. And you can see here some traditional practices. We all walk to the funeral. The graveyard is a little way away. That's the box going into the four-wheel drive, and then we all walk for a couple of kilometres. So it's a very respectful. It's a really respectful thing. But people are Christian. So here, this is in Creole, which people speak. We know one Balagaram Christ. We are now one with Christ. And so even if you're not Christian, you will end up with a Christian burial. So the aims of the particular project was to identify people in the unmarked graves, to train a cohort of Aboriginal people to record the graves. You can see we're hitting some of the Sustainable Development Goals here, collecting oral history and archival information, looking for long-term sustainability and local control from communities to record the graves and have that power back in the community, to not have to get somebody to come in. And because I'm a teacher, having training archaeology students to be able to work well with communities. The project was absolutely led by the elders of the community, and there's various times they've asked us to record it. And again, this year there's a new little old grave that's been found that people want us to record. And of course, more people have died. I was there last in January, but more people die all the time. This is us recording graves. This is Gary Jackson, anthropologist, who's my husband, who's also worked there with me for 30 years. Jasmine Williker on the right-hand side in the red shirt is undergoing a degree of archaeology at Flinders. So she's, and her mum has visited and lived in South Australia, lived in the room that I'm actually in for a while, for about a year. Oh, and then at the you can see at the cemetery, people are there. I'm writing stuff down. We're trying to work out who's got what grave, and different, a mix of university people and community people, and sometimes community people who are university people. So Isaac on the left-hand side, the Aboriginal man, that guy at the right, and both men on the left are actually Aboriginal. One's Aboriginal from down south and one is Aboriginal from the community. Using a bit of some GPR, which we all thought was interesting. We've recorded a digital map, and we still have 92 graves unidentified. People were recorded in trained in recording graves, both students and community people. And that's the map, which now needs a little bit of updating. We gave some recommendations to the local council, we gave some recommendations to the government. So that's our project, and it's around, the heritage is really, it's what people want preserved. So in this case, it's what people really are valuing, and graves, people die young, and graves are really an important thing. So this is an article that we wrote, and we're saying, okay, there's a business opportunity there. And we established a little thing called Grave Concerns, and we wanted to train people to be able to do this and record graves and train communities across the whole of the Northern Territory. And now this is the document that Sophia was talking about before, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how the work that we're doing articulates with some of those, and might not with some of the goals too. Obviously, no poverty. Oh, sorry, I haven't got the full thing there. But, by having jobs, then by getting education, then you're fighting extreme poverty. And so heritage is one way of trying to fight with that, to fight that. I love, somebody said heritage is a weapon for well-being, and I really love that. Good health and well-being. Okay, so and again, sorry, I didn't get the full thing, or the full thing's not showing there. Great. Okay, that got the whole thing. And the gender one is, I don't think I've got the gender one here, but the gender one is a little bit more problematic, because at the bottom of the gender one, it says, with community support, eradicate bias, gender, so it didn't say roles, but it was eliminate gender bias. And this community is very segregated by gender. Men and women normally sit separately often. This case, we've got family members, so we do have guys and girls together, but the gender roles are very essential to the community. Okay, so that's the end of that presentation. And really, I'll stop the screen share now. What do I do now? Do I have to stop the screen share?
Yes, as you wish. can I ask you to can I give you 5 minutes to conclude?
No, I'm ready to go now. So I think really what I've wanted to put into the conversation today was two things. The first thing is that World Heritage sites, mining sites, very, very things that bring in a lot of money, haven't taken away poverty. They haven't eradicated at all poverty from neighbouring communities, from Aboriginal communities. So there's something failing there. And the second thing is, I think that we need to not try and do the big sustainable development thing, but try and do the sustainable development goals, to try and look at individual goals. And really, they're my 2 points. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Smith. I would like now to introduce Madhura Dutta. That is, I did it already, but she was not in yet. Is director at Bangranatak, a 20 years old social enterprise working towards inclusive and sustainable development using culture-based approaches. Madhura, I give you the floor. I know that we have to launch a video first.
I will just sort of introduce it. That will be, I'll present around what you see on the video. But it was very interesting for us to see the kind of questions that you posed forward for this session, which is linking culture and heritage to sustainable development. And you've mentioned the specific goals as well. And also whether we need community to be organized for that. So both are extremely interesting for us, and you will know why when I get into the video. So I think our flagship program is Art for Life, and this is about that program.
High potential rural artist communities have not developed the business tools to engage markets, resulting in slow death of their unique art forms. Banglanatak.com's Art for Life program, proven in West Bengal, transforms artist communities into thriving micro-enterprises, impacting artist, art form and district.
9 years after inception of Art for Life, in 2013, the Department of MSME, Government of West Bengal, adopted Art for Life and partnered with UNESCO to develop 10 rural craft hubs benefiting 3,000 rural traditional handicraft artists across 10 districts of West Bengal. The success of the project led to expansion of the initiative to rural craft and cultural hubs involving an additional 12,000 beneficiaries across 15 districts of West Bengal.
26 art form transformations have had 100% success, doubling artists, primarily impacting and empowering women, increasing income 2.5 times, and reducing migrations. Low-income art forms shrunk from 38% to 15%, while high-income grew from nothing to 26%. More than 90% of artists now have a bank account. More than half have a new or renovated house. 77% of these with sanitation and 100% electrified. Almost every artist is formally trained on the art form. 30% are digitally aware, and 38% of the next generation are now proud of and involved in the art form. The village is now a hub for international workshops and collaborations, and 6 art forms have geographical indication status. Tourism is now an integral part of the program. Banglanatak.com has a 100-member core team in place to scale this repeatable program through partnerships in different states. Scale the model across 9 states and 150 districts, and create 300 micro-enterprises with more than 1 million thriving artists. West Bengal will cross 1 lakh artists. Goa will establish a responsible tourism model. Bihar will resurrect a vibrant artist identity. MP and Chhattisgarh will restore art-based livelihood to primitive tribal groups. Odisha will reconnect with its rural art capital to power growth. Rajasthan will expand tourism through rural hubs. Punjab will showcase its multicultural richness, and Assam will integrate communities through rich cultural roots. Together, this will create a rural artist enterprise of more than $1 billion per year.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for playing it at your end. So now I'll try and go into this model. So as you are aware, India is a very, very rich treasure trove of intangible cultural heritage, cultural skills across rural India. And they have the potential of getting turned into employable skills for sustainable livelihood. But unfortunately, it has never been in the mainstream economic development agenda of the government for various reasons. So when we started working in the field, poverty came in as one of the biggest factors impacting all other development issues. And what we tried to understand, because we worked in rural India, what we tried to understand was how do we invest in these creative cultural skills of people that are naturally there to build their capacities for creative entrepreneurs, cultural enterprises, and people-centric local economies. So when we started, it was more of an experiment in 2004, but over the years till date, it has evolved and it has turned into a model that has evidence for how it is achieving sustainable development goals and how it can be adapted in other geographies and in other places. I will mostly talk about Bengal here because they have the maximum number of successful case studies, but we also work across India with this model. By the model, I mean the framework, but then the strategies, because India is so vast and local cultures are so different. There are so many languages within one broad region. So strategies often change, but the broader aspects remain the same. So to introduce this model, the model has three main pillars. First is empowering the artists, the practitioners, the traditional artists, empowering them with skill upgradation, with business capacities, and with knowledge for them to successfully and directly link with the markets and carry on their own businesses. Second part is safeguarding the cultural, intangible cultural heritage art form. This happens through very organized and systematic documentation. Documentation goes into various kinds of publication because we work with handicrafts as well as performing arts, including theater, dance, oral traditions, etc. So they go into different kinds of publication in terms of films, in terms of videos, in terms of articles, and the promotion of these to bring the identity and the knowledge of these art forms and these artists to the forefront. Intellectual property tools is another very important component for us because it helps to safeguard the artist's rights, and which is a huge problem everywhere where traditional artists are trying to make a living from their own traditional art. And these also help to create their identity and their visibility in a very large way. So that is the way by which we get the artists to directly work with the market and promote them in a way that people, customers, consumers know them directly, as against going through a middleman or through an agent. The third pillar is transforming artists' villages into cultural hubs. Now, traditionally in India, this art and culture, traditional art and culture are practiced by communities who are essentially a cohesive community living in a particular geographical region, mostly a village or a cluster of villages. So our objective has always, and mostly these are cottage industries, home-based industries where families practice, and each family probably can be considered as a production unit for these cultural forms. So our unit of development is the village, not the artist. So when we look at the village, the building a sustainable financial and ecological model of in these art and craft villages actually lead to improved living conditions. And these villages also become tourist destinations eventually, because they are cultural hubs where so many artists live together and they actively practice their craft, they run their livelihood, they have enterprises, and they become a very attractive cluster for tourists, for photographers, for visitors, for writers, for researchers to visit. So in Bengal, we have 20 active established village cultural hubs covering 25,000 artists and 30 different art and craft forms. So now, what are the interesting aspects of this model? What are the key aspects of this model? If I go into that, first for us is community participation in the design, planning, and implementation. Pardon? Shall I go on?
Yes, please.
So one is community participation through the design, planning, and implementation of the project. They become an equal stakeholder in the project. That is fundamental to us, because without that, the process will never be sustainable, and we will never be able to exit from that whole intervention. Second is building a collective, mobilizing and organizing the community, artists, to come together and form an organized collective. The registered body may be any kind, but essential is the understanding that they are a collective, cohesive group, and institutionalizing that collective to create that strong identity. So what happens is, after forming a collective, it is a very difficult process, but after forming the collective, they eventually realize that it strengthens their collective identity, and it also strengthens and increases their negotiation power for their own rights and for the markets. For example, I can quickly give you a few examples. For example, we have a village of scroll painters. There are about 300 artists there, and they have formed a collective, which is a society called Chitrataru, and which is registered. Then we have a metal craft cluster, which is called Dokra, and there we have a trust. Then we have this village is particularly very interesting. The local embroiders, they are all women, and it is a Muslim village. It was extremely difficult to, and very marginalized women. It was extremely difficult when we started the process, but today there are 300 micro enterprises run by these women. So they together form a larger collective for the overall social development and well-being of that village. So organizing community has always been fundamental for us for ensuring collective well-being. The third important aspect is multi-stakeholder approach. It is an art and culture project, but it is not an art and culture project. It is a development project. So involving the local governance, the local community-based organizations, and the local stakeholders are very important to make the project mainstream in terms of the development agenda of the local government, in terms of accessing government schemes, in terms of getting access to the entitlements. So then the government and the CBOs come forward for ensuring that the schemes are accessed, local infrastructure development, development of basic amenities so that these villages become easy to reach, the roads are good, there is sanitation and other things. Then the fourth important aspect for us is annual village festival. we have institutionalized annual village festivals. Why? Because festivals for us becomes a component to attract people to the destination, to establish and identify that place as a very important artist, culture, traditional art, craft destination. And over time, that has really sort of gone international. And these village festivals, we don't own them. The village festivals are owned and managed by the community themselves. It is their festival. We have built their capacities over time for them to be able to do this. And today there is a whole calendar of festivals that happen, and that is also mainstream with the festivals of the country. Fifth aspect that we have, very important, again, we have emphasized a lot, is international cultural program, exchange and collaboration. This we have specifically done because it not only gives a lot of exposure to these artists who have never got an opportunity to even go out of their villages, and today they are traveling international, but also creates a lot of aspiration. It gives a lot of inspiration for them to invest in their own culture and own society. So what happens is when it brings a lot of pride and recognition to these artists, strengthening their identity. Then the other aspect is there are community resource centers in these villages with community museums, showcasing the community's own historical and cultural narratives of their own craft and art forms. This is a matter of huge pride, and these resource centers, which were built in partnership with the government, have spaces for collaboration, for exchange, for workshops, for skill transmission, etc. The other aspect is partnerships and collaboration. This has become particularly important in the COVID and post-COVID scenario we have seen, because we are realizing more and more that we need collaboration to accelerate the positive development and the well-being of the community. So we have had several collaborations with Ministry of Tourism, Ministry of Culture, and British Council, and several other organizations. So now if I come to the key learnings or the key outcomes, strengthened skill base creates shared resource for economic development. We have seen 2.5 times rise in the income of these artists. They are all independent entrepreneurs today, and they run their own cultural enterprises. Exclusion ends with strengthened identity and wider recognition. Community with new aspirations take pride in their own village, own space, own culture, and they take ownership of their own development. More than 60% of the rural artists are women who are today leading own enterprises, and many of them have become brands by themselves. So women empowerment results in social development. They focus, when they have a voice, they focus on health, on sanitation, on children's education, and in family well-being, which again sort of contributes to the overall well-being. Out-migration to cities have stopped. So the village economies have become parallel, local, sustainable, inclusive economies. They are not serving the urban industry as an add-on. They are an independent industry by their own worth and by their own capacities. There is positive ecological development as a result of all these, because these hubs promote local economies, and these local economies traditionally are mostly based on locally available raw materials or locally grown natural materials with which these art forms are presented. So just to end that, here what we have seen is, I mean, if I will not want to match specifically with the Sustainable Development Goals, but we see poverty alleviation, women empowerment, responsible consumption, partnership collaboration, I mean, sanitation, well-being, I mean, most of the SDGs we have been touching. And when we first started this initiative, we did not think that we could arrive here. It has been a long journey, and it has evolved over time. And today it has also become a major product of rural and responsible cultural tourism. So there's an integrated model. This is a very development-oriented model, and it is completely based on the traditional wealth of local art and culture in India. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It was a fantastic presentation of your project, I have to say. I have myself a lot of questions, of course, but I will put them on the back. You started, so I will put on, let's say, gallery view, so that we may have a conversation now. So as you said at the beginning, we had some questions, two questions at the beginning of this panel that could have maybe raised some debate. One of them that you mentioned already was how do we reimagine and redesign an inclusive and sustainable cultural heritage sector in relation to points to the Sustainable Development Goals 1, 5, 10, 11, 12, and 13 and 17. I mean to allow the people to understand what we talk about, I would just share for a few minutes a small slide that is reminding about the contents of these development goals. I think these were tackled already by most of you. Maybe my question here would be on Sustainable Development Goals 17, if there is maybe a comment on that, how to create partnerships to achieve this goal.
So
this is open to the three panelists.
Okay. So may I address?
Sure. Thanks.
Okay. So I think, as I also briefly mentioned, that partnerships and collaboration has been very important for us, be it with the local government who are not actually giving us the money or the fund to actually implement the project, be it with local civil societies, be it with the international cultural institutes. We have promoted partnership in a big way. And just to talk about the organization, that we have an advisory status to the ICH committee of UNESCO. And we are also a national partner of UNESCO to replicate Art for Life model. We have a special consultative status with ECOSOC, and we are a national global partner of UNWTO. So all these, and then we work with different other, we reach out to sort of talk about these issues, like we've also reached out here. So, and post-COVID, we have seen that a lot of actors in the field of culture and development have come forward to tackle this entire sort of adversity together. So we, probably you're aware that in India, we have this brand called Incredible India, which is a Ministry of Tourism brand. So we have been trying to get them to promote the villages for such a long time, but nothing happened. But post-COVID, I mean, during COVID and right after that, tourism being one of the sectors which was most badly hit, they came forward because they realized that this kind of a local tourism for local tourists is a sustainable way of going forward. So, you know, if in a village, if there is an artist village, the neighboring village does not know that they exist. And if they come to know, if the local tourists go there, if the nearby districts, the villages, the urban towns, small towns go there, then not only the appreciation increases, but it helps to create further solidarity in that whole area. So everything, I'm trying to say that all these are integrated and connected, but we have seen that, I mean, irrespective of whether that organization is in culture and in working in culture or working in development, we have excellent media partnerships, for example, and media has hugely helped us to promote all these interventions for people to understand what is the impact. So I think multiple types of partners can come together to contribute to a more integrated and holistic action towards sustainable development.
Thank you. Any other comment? Yeah, please, Sophia.
It's a really important question, and what Dr. Duta, as said, is very important, the importance of different stakeholders coming together. What I've seen in particular in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals is that there's a lot of international aid, international money and development money going into a lot of projects in the global south. And often those partnerships do not work because of unequal power relations and because they tend to be really short term as well. And also because they fail to create trust between different stakeholders. And one issue I also have with SDG 17 is the difficulties, even at local levels, for different stakeholders to trust each other. I've seen, I mean, I work in Southern Africa at the moment. I've seen, you know, businesses not trusting, you know, local communities, own businesses, because they don't think, you know, their products, for instance, if you're talking about economic development, their products are not good enough. So they're importing food from, I don't know, the European market, for instance. So there's a lot of issues with trust when we think about, you know, partnership between different stakeholders. And I think this is one of the key issues with sustainable development and the economic level. But I've also seen a number of positive relationship between primarily private enterprises which develop, you know, a social and ethical approach to business development, you know, involving, you know, local communities in their work, primarily in South Africa, and also talking about staycation and tourism in. If we want to talk about economic development, we've talked a lot about the unequal power relations in tourism. I think it's very important to stress that, but it's also, and we've heard that a lot in webinar 4. There were a lot of people from South Africa, but it's interesting also to see what the government is trying to do, is trying to use the COVID-19 crisis to redesign the maps of tourism in South Africa. And it's going to be really interesting to see what's going to happen and what is the government going to be able to do, because a lot of the interests are in the hands of, you know, settlers, colonizers, and it's going to be really interesting to see whether the COVID-19 pandemic is a way of shifting those power relations or not. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future. So SDG 17, very important, but it's quite problematic to put into action. And again, if you want to see how to implement it, you can also look at our policy guidance. We do give a number of ways forward to address some of those issues that I've just spoken about.
And I think I'd add that I think for the people I work with, the long-term relationships are the things that are really important. So what people hate is people come, you do something with them, and you kind of make friends, you tell them lots of things, you share your culture, you share your heritage, and then they go away. And you think, people say, oh, when are they coming back? And they're never coming back. They've come, they've had their, you know, they've moved on to something else. People in a lot of the organisations that surround us, that are part of, the CEOs stay for 2 or 3 years, you know, so you really, it's hard to, in terms of, and a lot of things, and this is a really critical issue, because a lot of things depend on one person or a couple of people, a particular relationship for it to work. And what I liked about what you were doing in India was it seems so it's much broader, because it is growing more, it's broader, stronger on the ground. So anything that is involving not enough people it will fall over when someone dies, for a start, you know, or when someone changes their job, or so how do you make it? It's got to be a movement. It's got to be a thing amongst everybody, and then partnerships come in as you need them for a particular thing. So we're partnering with the local school at the moment because we're developing heritage materials for the local heritage materials, local cultural and heritage materials for the curriculum at the local school, on the basis that kids will want to learn about their own culture. They might want to learn about their own graveyard, and they'll learn how to do some things about that, their own rock art sites, their own kinship systems. So, yeah, I do see partnerships as something that can facilitate, but I also see them as something that's hard to obtain the trust and hard to maintain long term.
Thank you. Well, I waiting for some questions. I mean, is there anybody from the crowd that would like to put some questions? Because I have some more. Still in the same question about the Sustainable Development Goals. I think also goal number 12 about responsible consumption and production is quite important, and I would like maybe you to say something more on that. It was raised by Madhura Dutta already, and recently I was, crossing heritage with the circular economy, for example. And I think these are two important concepts, I would say, because heritage is by definition circular, I would say, and maybe they can help each other, I mean, to promote. And is it feasible for you, especially in the local communities you are working with?
So may I take that question?
Well, the binomium, to put together circular economy and heritage in general. So this sustainable production and consumption for local communities.
Yeah. So I'll just go back a little to say what the issue was from where we sort of shifted, and it still exists probably in many parts if the policies are not supporting local economies, is that all these local art and craft firms, which is essentially the cultural capital of the country, and the skills that already naturally exist with the communities, the exclusive skills, the exclusive local raw materials, because these traditional industries, because they were part of livelihood, they were created for they were part of traditional livelihood earlier, but because these were devalued and then it started dying with people leaving it, and with an impact of globalization, urbanization, and changing markets, these communities took a backseat, and new designs came, new large markets came, and things like that. So I think a very fundamental thing that happened was, from a very sustainable consumption pattern, especially in India, I would say, and I'm sure many other parts of the world, it sort of changed to a use and throw model. Now, that was not the original culture of how we used things. And what happened with these art and crafts is that they started trying to compete with the technology-based cultural industries. And they had to make this fast. So for example, communities who used to use natural colors traditionally, which they made from the local plant, started use poster colors. Communities who used local fiber started using plastic, and things like that. So I can go on giving you many examples, but things like this started happening because they did not realize that this is a more sustainable process, because the market never asked for it and they had to survive for the market. But eventually what happened was, if today you look around and you see the international markets, they are all promoting responsible consumption. Most of the international markets have indicators which are all related to sustainable production and sustainable consumption, ethical production, and fair trade. So people have become more and more conscious now, but that was the market. But when we built the capacities of these people, we essentially it took a long time, but we mobilized and we kept motivating them to use the local materials. Like in Bengal, for example, we have 8 or 9 different kinds of local natural fiber that grows there itself. So the communities pick those up, process those, use natural dyes to dye those, and then make products with hands. So how is that less advanced than the technologically produced products. So, the uniqueness, and that was the market part. The other part is educating the market. So the branding and the promotion was done in a way that we can sort of show to the world the uniqueness and the very high skill involved in all these cultural forms. So I think in terms of responsible consumption, wherever we have been able to go back, it is a local economy which is low energy, which is based on local natural materials, which has stopped migration to cities, reducing the pressure on cities, and which has an overall well-being of the community as a whole. And they use local resources to produce for themselves and for the market. And in terms of the market, their promotion have created exclusive branding qualities for them, which have actually started taking more, going towards more responsible consumption. But I think the responsible consumption is a trend that has started over quite a few years now. And our challenge is to align the local community-based art and craft to deal with the quality, the standards, as well as meet the sustainable indicators of the international market. So that is a process that goes on, but this is how we understand the ecosystem, and this is how we have been able to revive the traditional industries and have established their value so that they can actually gain more by being a sustainable, responsible economy. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Claire Smith, maybe you want to say something on that, because there is also another question that is maybe connecting the two things about how do we change the mentalities to reach actually this local production. And you were mentioning in your presentation the fact that a lot of money is coming into these local communities by the effect of the listing, but this money is not, changing the situation there, apart from poverty and so on. Could there be an answer somewhere in this local production or taken over by the communities in local productions?
Sorry. Look, I'm really not sure. I don't see. So the people of Barunga are hunter-gatherers traditionally. So you're out in the bush, you use what you use, and you move on. So one of the things is that there's not the Western accumulation of material goods in the same way that, we have this great Western mindset has this great reverence for property. But in terms of, I'm really not sure what the opportunities are there. I don't see them myself. I think we're not very responsible, and I don't see it changing, actually, very much.
Yeah. Thank you. Sophia, do you have any idea on that? Opinion?
I just want to ask the question to Dr. Dutta, because she was saying they changed that, and maybe once she has responded, I can add something to what she said. That was, I think she captured everything. That's just one point. So how did you manage to change mentality? That's what I'd like to understand, Dr. Dutta, please.
So, we try our best, and wherever we see the change in mentality, we invest there more. I think one way now it is much easier because there is social media, and we document the production processes, and we try to sort of make videos and films in a way that can really become components of education for either the viewers or the children. Or so educating the market, continuously educating the market by highlighting what is the uniqueness and what is the local flavor of that particular cultural industry is very important. And it is a matter of advocacy also, like continuously writing, showcasing. It's hammering continuously to identify these qualities. The other thing is that, again, we have an advantage also because India is so rich in handicrafts and performing arts. There is a natural sort of network of artist communities, of community organizations, civil societies who work with these cultural forms to actually advocate for handmade. So the fact that it is a premier product, it is luxury, it is special, that has, I mean, the government policies also have that in place, and the local community networks advocate for that a lot. So that's an advantage. And then there are certifications, so there is geographical indication to create the exclusive identity of the place. We have got geographical indications for about 8 or 9 hubs. We have applied for more. Then there is a certification called Craft Mark, which is the only non-government certification for authentic handmade products, which are ethically produced and which pays fair wages. So some of the crafts who have been able to get that Craft Mark certification helps. But finally, I think it is about educating the market by continuous advocacy through different channels, and also educating the producers, because they do not realize that if they go and say that this is made of natural color, which I make from the plant which grows beside my house, will be of attraction to a buyer. So mobilizing them and telling them what is special, and actually establishing that by bringing people to their village, by doing international exchange, by getting them the markets that will appreciate these kinds of ethical production, responsible production, are very important. So I think it's a matter of continuous advocacy, promotion, branding, both on the part of the teaching, I mean, building the capacity of the producer, as well as educating the market. But it's a struggle still, yeah, because quality always becomes an issue, and that's the more sort of the economic and the industry part. But then that's also very important if they have to sell. You can't just say that, oh, this is handmade, so the quality is not so good. So it's a huge training investment that we have to do. I mean, I can give you a very, very small example. Like there is a natural fiber weaver who is now a regular supplier to an organization in France. But first, when they had ordered mats. And on the mats, with weaving, they create various kinds of designs and borders, which are extremely beautiful. Now, they said that this mat, you will create the borders with a particular measurement. Now, the producers do not understand that 1 millimeter means 1 millimeter. They will make 1.2 and say, it's that only, na? It's looking that way. So then the market rejects, but they are interested in the sale. So when the sale does not happen and the market rejects, then they understand where they have sort of gone wrong. So similarly, the responsible production aspects are also something that slowly come into their vocabulary, and then they start using those to actually brand their products. It's a long process, difficult process.
Thank you very much. I have a question that is coming from the attendees, from Marielle Richon. In some communities, local population, and especially women, is so much involved in agriculture, so food production for survival for their families, that there is no time left for crafts or art performance. Talents and skills are not lacking, just time and capacities. So time and capacity building for creating local enterprises and businesses. What is this, or are the solution for that? Or is there any way to?
So I mean, it's okay if a community has enough economic returns from agriculture. So the important thing is that we are not, I mean, our objective for using art and culture is to create sustainable livelihoods and sustainable development. So if there are villages which are very rich in agriculture and they have substantial economic returns from agriculture, then they are not the villages where we will sort of go and try to tell them, oh, you do crafts and art forms also. There are some communities whose agriculture is mostly seasonal. So maybe for 5 months or 6 months, they have the agricultural thing, and the rest of the time they use for building the, for making the crafts or for performing arts. So it is completely the community's choice whether they are going to take agriculture as their primary livelihood or art and craft as their primary livelihood, or they will do both. But it really depends on what is the kind of return that is coming from the current industry, whether there is space to invest in the already existing skills to create another industry to be able to maximize on the development and returns of the community. So, yeah.
Yes, please.
I have 2 points. First of all, I would like to go back to SDG 12 because I had a point to make that relates to all of the discussion we've been having yesterday and this morning. And I would like to link our session with what we've done in the past. And I wanted to, I mean, the problem with, I see with responsible consumption and production SDG 12, the issue, I mean, I look at local food production, particularly in Africa, and I look at intangible practices. There's lots of foods, local food production that are linked to intangible practices. The issue is that it's very, very difficult to sustain them for the simple reason that the North invades with very cheap product Africa, with their food products. Just a very simple example. I was in Senegal. Senegal is a producer of cashew nuts. It is cheaper when I go to a supermarket in Senegal to buy cashew nuts that have been, I don't know where they come from. They come from Europe. I don't know where, but it was written, they come from Belgium. I don't know where they actually come from, but it's cheaper for me to buy this cashew nut than buy actually local cashew nuts. How on earth is that possible? And this is that for everything. It's cheaper to buy jam coming from France than jam produced locally. I mean, there's a massive issue here. I mean, I'm speaking about, you know, when you buy your food in a supermarket like Carrefour or Auchan. And so the North has a major role to play in stopping to dump food in the global South. So I think this is really the key issue for me when it comes to SDG 12, responsible consumption and production. And about the question from Marielle Richon, just to have a different point of view, I really like what Dr. Dutta says. We really should not impose you know, the development of craft on a community that do not need it. But I also think that men have a great role to play. So really, and this is all what the SDG are all about. It's about, you know, men trying to look at whether they can change their role as well. And if that is, of course, been accepted by the community. And agreeing to maybe take on more work, because otherwise there's not a possibility to go on. Obviously, that needs to be done in a localized manner, and as Professor Claire Smith, that can be problematic in some cases. But you know, we've seen a lot of cases recently of, you know, ministers. Men minister in African context, you know, talking about caring for kids, you know, etc. So I'm thinking here more about a balance between gender roles, and I think this is also part of the future. And of course, that needs to be negotiated at local levels. Thanks.
Thank you very much,
Professor
Smith. Yeah, please.
I did have a question to Dr. Dutta. So my colleague Alok, he's working with Naga people, and he's saying that in that area, COVID-19 has meant that a lot of people who were doing traditional crafts are now leaving, like they're moving out because they can no longer survive. He's working in Nagaland.
Yeah, and because of COVID-19, they're leaving. And what did you say at the end? I didn't.
Oh, well, because they can't survive in the way using their traditional crafts as they did. And he's very concerned about that. And I think what you're doing is very important because it is addressing something that, so while you're obviously doing some very worthwhile projects in a lot of places, there's also this other thing happening where people are winding down, finding it too hard.
Yeah. So I think Northeastern India is a very different sort of challenge, or completely different from rest of India, because their policies, their infrastructure, their geography, the local cultural groups, everything is sort of very different from how the policies work in rest of India. That is one. And for many sort of issues and reasons and its history. But at the same time, the other very important thing is outreach. Physically, it is very difficult to reach these places. So a lot of people work with the Northeast, but then if a market is sitting outside that area and trying to access these groups and their production, it is geographically extremely difficult to reach out, and the government has not done enough for accessibility of these communities. So a lot more challenges happen in these places because of the adversity of the way they live and the places they live in. So, I mean, this has been a continuous problem that the Northeast people, their skills and their crafts and their festivals are amazing. Their skills are amazing, but it is so difficult to reach out to them or for them to come out. That has been a challenge, and that requires, I think, more supporting policies from the government and not just for, culture-led livelihood. So, yeah.
I think that's partly a problem for Aboriginal people in remote communities too, because where I'm working is 80 kilometres from the nearest town, and 1 in 4 households would have a car. And so, and even just to go out and get colour, which we do sometimes when I'm there, or to get materials for baskets, you've got to have a car to get out there, or some of it you can get along the river, but there's an enormous amount of work in it. And then what do people get back for the hour, for a basket that might take 3 days to make? So there's really, there's the actual barriers, the remote barriers, and then there's the lack of incentive, really. So people do make things sometimes, and I work in a couple of communities, 3 close communities, and one of them is a little basket making place, and there's only 85 people who live there, and I don't know, 10 of them are basket makers. But so that kind of becomes part of that community's identity in a way too. So, and I think people reinforce other people. So doing it by yourself or just 1 or 2 people, it falls over. And then of course we've got the problem of passing it on to the next generation, because the next generation is watching video games
everywhere, I think. Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much. Probably there are many more. Let me see if there is another question there. No? So, there are many more questions, at least from my side, but I will maybe send you privately. It's a very interesting debate. So we have to close now the panel because we are entering into the panel number 5, which is supposed to start at, now, actually. So I thank you very much for your contributions. Of course, I ask you to stay and for a sort of final discussion together with panel number 5. So I ask, the panelists of this panel, roundtable, on the call-out competition, if they're all in. Thank you. Thais, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, thanks a lot. Thank you very much. Sorry, it was a little problem. Would you, when would you like us to send your video?
You can start now. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Turkey is the first one that I sent to you about the Little Africa.
One second. Just a second, guys.
Nesse tour, você se conectará com a região portuária do Rio de Janeiro, conhecida como Pequena África, reduto de grande presença negra e herança africana. Local por onde surgiram os primeiros ranchos, blocos carnavalescos e candomblés da cidade. Influência cultural de diferentes grupos étnicos. Reduto da diáspora africana e de construção e contribuição de seus descendentes para o desenvolvimento econômico e cultural da cidade do Rio de Janeiro e do país. Espaço de intelectualidade e de luta abolicionista. A região da Pequena África passa a ser a região de produtividade e riqueza populacional. Palco de revoltas e resistência da população frente a injustiças sociais e exclusões. Território de muita força, resiliência, alegria e potência. Por muitos séculos, essa história foi apagada e silenciada. Porém, foi exportado para o Brasil um estilo de vida africano. Se conectar com a história da Pequena África carioca é se conectar com a história do Brasil.
Thank you. Thank you, Thais. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Thais Rosa. I'm a Brazilian and I'm a researcher, and also I'm a founder of Conectando Territórios. That is a travel agents that bring education and tourism as a way to connect people to Afro-Brazilian history, memory, and culture, and also traditional communities such as the Quilombos communities here in Brazil. So my work is also bringing people from the Africa diaspora together, creating dialogue events, doing outdoor classes, and different types of way to bring education with tourism in the places that we can saw in the video. This is Valongo Wharf. That is, it was the biggest port of enslaved Africans in Brazil. Actually, in the Americas, is the biggest port in the Americas that Africans disembarked here, and almost 1 million of them disembarked in this port in Rio de Janeiro. So Brazil is the biggest African diaspora population outside Nigeria, for example, and we have all the lack of resources, education, and so we have a huge gap between Blacks and whites in Brazil. And so that's why I also decided to bring this history, because the history of the Valongo Wharf was uncovered for more than 1 century. And actually this is something new for us. It was discovered in 2011. So that's why also I want to bring the history of the African descendants that they also contribute to develop like Brazil, and also brought all the culture and all the develop that we have in our country. So this is my project. It's a way to deconstruct the narrative of the colonial history in Rio.
Thank you very much. Really interested. Very, very good. Very interesting for all of us, I believe. Now, if it's okay, I would like to pass to the next contribution by Dr. Jinya Desai from the Center for Heritage Preservation.
Thank you very much. It's it's Jinya Desai. Yeah, no worries. It is indeed a privilege to be present here and presenting our collective work. This is what I'm talking about here is work that collectively from my center, my team, and some of my colleagues and students have all worked together towards. And after a lot of going around what we really need to do, we've consolidated this particular project. So I'll just like to very briefly present that project to all of you. So to give you a background, the project that we are proposing is located in the historic city of Ahmedabad, which was inscribed as a World Heritage Site in 2017. The inscription of the city talks about the historic settlement. It talks about the unique architecture of it, the unique syncretic architecture of Islamic, Jain, and Hindu architecture that comes together to create mosques and houses and temples. It also talks about neighborhood structures and how communities live different communities live next to each other in the neighborhood structures called pole, and the urban pattern and the architecture of that, which is also extremely exquisite. Just to give you some numbers, the settlement that we are talking about over here, or the city that we are talking about over here, is 5.5 square kilometers in its range, which is kind of, just to give you an idea, comparatively, Bath is 1.5 square kilometers. So we're talking about a much larger city here, and more than 3,000 buildings are within this city are listed as high-grade heritage. And of course, this entire this thing is a core zone. While talking about a very glorious history of how the city formed, what this nomination does here and the historic narratives thereon in the political scenario we are living in tend to forget is that a lot of the structure of the city as we see today and a lot of the memories of history the way people have today are formed by the history of violence and riots amongst various communities living within the city. A historic study reveals that there are more than 393 small neighborhoods that have people coming from it's a group of migrants that have come and settled together over the years. The people coming from all the way to from Balochistan to China to all parts of India, from and belonging to different religions, different diverse communities. And when they settle together, the history of violence and the history of riots, or history of intercommunal disharmony is as old as early 16th century. And a lot of the structure of the city is formed by that. A lot of the memories of the city is formed by that. The entire historic narrative seems to be forgetting that. And I think we collectively think that that's an important part of history that needs to be remembered, is because there are the latest episode of violence was in 2002, which displaced a lot of people. There was a lot of out-migration. There was a lot of redistribution of population, and every major episode of violence has resulted into these kind of redistribution of communities. What this redistribution does is that many of these religious structures or structures that are co-owned or owned by multiple people end up getting abandoned. They end up getting left behind. And there are these various structures in the city. In my cursory estimate, there are more than 300 such structures in the city that are lying vacant. At least 100 of them are already listed as heritage. They're lying vacant without care simply because the community that was living around it have now migrated to another part because of this kind of violence. There is an immense need, and given the current political scenario, given the way religion is being talked about with a certain kind of homogeneity, these diverse narratives of history, these diverse narrative of religious and communal identities need to be talked about so that people can reconcile with their past, so that they can look at their heritage along with the memories that they have with it. So first, we have kind of started an initiative in our center, which we call the Conservation Site School Initiative. In that, what we are going to do is that we are going to partner with the community custodians, and they're usually a collective body or more than one person. We are going to partner with those custodians, and we are going to occupy these sites for 2 or 3 years. In this process of occupation, we are going to run educational initiatives. We are going to run lectures. We are also going to have community, we have already had a year of that. We are going to have community workshops in which we will discuss what could be the future of this structure. To give you an example, the first site that we have picked is a small mosque, a wooden mosque in one of these neighborhoods, where most of the Muslims who were living around this neighborhood vacated the neighborhood after the 1985 riots. The neighborhood is practically vacated now. There are very few people living there, and it has started getting to convert into a commercial area. And as a result, the mosque itself is a site of a lot of negative activities. It has also partly has become a site of vandalization, a bit of there are instances of certain kind of crimes there. So what we hope is by doing this, by doing educational activities over there, and by discussing the future of the site, we intend to achieve multiple goals. Some of it we've already started, as I said, discussing, and we have had a couple of workshops around how to document a heritage, or how to do non-destructive tests, or we're planning workshops on how to hands-on workshops on how to conserve this kind of building. We've had a lecture on how women use mosques, and is there a possibility of this becoming a site where women come to pray. And this is particularly important because historically, whenever there were these kind of major riots, and whenever there were these major community violence instances, the bridge between different communities were usually the women, and how women related to the other communities and with each other. There is a study that we have done where we have identified the entire secondary substructure of how women related to women of other communities. And we thought that this site can possibly become that kind of a place where reconciliation processes can start off. So through community participation and through these educational workshops, we intend to achieve 3 major goals. One is to build local capacities, especially to demystify the idea of conservation. Because invariably what we find in these communities is that they think conservation is a highly technical idea that people with lesser funds, or people living in smaller houses, or people owning smaller structures cannot afford. It's for monuments, it's not for smaller buildings. So one objective we hope to achieve is that. Second is we hope to address the narrative of the history of violence, and through that introduce the process of reconciliation, introduce the issues of negative narratives around that, and introduce the processes that bring people together. And the third aspect is to introduce these new thoughts on issues of how gender roles can play an important role, can become an important aspect in reconciliation especially with where sites have histories of or have violent pasts or histories that need reconciliation amongst community. We also hope we have already started getting interests from other marginalized communities of this region to involve us in similar other initiatives in the site as well. So I think, yeah, with that I will conclude, and I think that's all I have to say about our case. We hope to present that to you at the end of this entire process. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for your interesting presentation. I think it was very clear and raised a lot of important points that were, by the way, also very much connected to the presentation of the panel 4. So now I will give the floor to Daniela Barbosa.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, do you all hear me? Do you all see me?
Yes, very well, thanks.
Okay, well, first of all, I would like to thank you all for the opportunity of being here and to share my research with you. Currently I'm a PhD student, and my research is about to be finished in June this year. Well, I don't feel very comfortable speaking English, but here we go, and I hope you are able to understand everything. My work is focused on the cultural heritage of people who work in Brasilia's construction sites. I work mostly with documents that had registered their preservation history. But for this talk here with you, I will focus on the big picture of the problem. I don't know if you know all of this, but Brasilia is the capital of Brazil, and it was launched in 1960. And a few years later, in 1985, Brasilia was the first modern site recognized by UNESCO as a cultural heritage of humanity. That recognition was based on the conception of Brasilia as a singular, living expression of the principles of and ideals of the modernist movement, and embodied in the tropics through urban and architecture projects by Lúcio Costa and Oscar Niemeyer. That means the big names of Brazilian architecture. But which I study now is the period of construction of Brasilia. It was between 1967 and 1960. And it had a huge number of workers from all over the country that came here. I live in Brasilia, so they came here at the time to work, and their conditions were really tough. And although the exploitation of the labor and the human sacrifice have occurred during the period, politicians and also members of the official history of Brasilia wanted to build an image of unity and hope among workers. So they tried to build a very positive image of the period, minimizing accidents of work and even deaths. During the construction period of Brasilia, the workers, they lived in camp works, which were similar to small wooden towns, and that contained some urban equipments like churches, schools, and hospitals. The idea at the time was the destruction of those camps, initially provisional, as soon as Brasilia was launched. So the workers, they had to live in anywhere. So they were near the construction site that will become Brasilia, right? But they didn't have the right to remain there. And but also the image of the workers was glorified as anonymous heroes of Brasilia. The construction camp, which were their home, began to be eliminated in the 60s. So they lost their home, making it clear that those people should leave the monumental work that they had built. So they were expelled of the center. But not all of them, because it was by struggle and resistance from their residents, these residents, that some constructions camps managed to establish themselves, despite the recurring attempts to eliminate them. Thus, around the modern and monumental site of Brasilia today, we have some cities that once were construction camps, such as Candangolândia, which means Candango is the name they have, the workers of Brasilia, they were nicknamed Candangos. So the city has this image, Candangolândia, Metropolitana, Vila Planalto, and Vila of Paranoá, which is the name of our lake in here. Each of these small towns conserved a wooden church. That's interesting, and that's my work, which I'm working on it. For years, the community was the community's charge. So those churches are still in wood, and the community have to make an effort to conserve them. These churches, now they are recognized as a heritage of Brasilia, but in local, in a local way. It's not for all over Brazil, but only for Brasilia government. It's a cultural heritage that represent those workers, and they symbolize the memory of construction workers. But, and that's interesting, despite the reference of workers' memory, these temples complement the official history, because even though it's related to the workers, they value the whole of the workers as an artisans of the monumental idea of Brasilia. In addition, the image of the simple wooden church is used in the preservationist discourse to reinforce a community way of life that is usually associated with the construction of Brasilia. So they are valued as a small part of monumental Brasilia, and not by what they suffered and the people that were dead. No, they were just there. They're just a monumental site. They are not the monumental site. They are those who helped to build this, and that's why they are important according to the official history. And so in my research, I think there's no escape, because even though they conquered a space in Brasilia, their whole is always related to the monumental history of Brasilia. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope everyone could understand what I said.
Thank you, Daniela. We understood very well what you said. I think it was a very nice presentation that was taking to the floor an additional dimension of the inequalities from the, some World Heritage sites. So thank you very much. Now I give the floor to our last presentation of the panel from Jane Eugenia Stoikova. I hope I'm right.
Yes, just Jane. Thank you so much, Marco, for the introduction, and thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this discussion today. First, I will introduce myself just one more time. I'm a specialist in digital and experimental museology, and I'm studying, completing my MA in archaeological practice in London. And I'm working to introduce digital humanities applications to research and museum display practices such as data visualization, spatial mapping, digital archiving, and a lot more. Currently, I'm in Russia, and I'm working to introduce those applications in Russian cultural institutions. But as my education and my practice lies worldwide, today I will be talking about the Taj Mahal as the project of my World Heritage Site. So the Taj Mahal is listed by United Nations Educational and Social and Cultural Organization UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. Is a tomb in Agra, Tajgani district, is positioned as a centerpiece of incredible India. The monument is seen as a symbol of national identity, a trademark of flourishing Indian empire, and a monument of love, beauty, and perfection. UNESCO, a World Heritage Site nomination of Outstanding Universal Value, made Taj one of the most sought-out tourist experiences in the world. The designation of World Heritage Site aims to achieve a balance between protection of heritage sites, planned development of tourism, and urban and rural development. There, Taj Mahal is intended to act as a catalyst for community and city growth. However, the site management failed to convert the development potential into significant economic, social, and infrastructural improvements of Agra. The structured, unproductive, and unsustainable management of the site reinforced socio-economic and spatial inequalities, accelerated humanitarian challenges, including water, sewage, and solid waste systems, and intensified challenges related to power dynamics. It seems that today, World Heritage Site reality differs from the commonly projected Taj Mahal postcard representation, the Wat Taj. The attention that surrounded the site and focused on the tourism industry turned the local native communities into neglected minority groups. Their interests and needs are being excluded and discriminated. Those narratives are being silenced, leaving us to question the legitimacy of the value World Heritage Site provides. I intend to present the alternative narrative of Taj Mahal World Heritage Site described above through a conceptual digital website platform. The narrative will be constructed using mixed media techniques, including interviews, articles, stories, poetry, animated cartoons, and other visual responses and interpretations of the issue. The narrative will be presented as a life story of a little boy Taj living in the neighborhood. On the platform, the audience becomes Taj and gets to explore his alternative reality of living amongst the World Heritage Site. Viewers are shown the direct consequences of World Heritage Site management on the daily lives of locals like Taj. Contemporary and experimental curatorial initiative designed in collaboration with writers, visual designers, and predominantly Tajgani local representatives aims to reflect on the depth of the problematic relationship between the site management and its local minority groups. Here, I just want to return back to the discussion and the presentation made by Dr. Madhura Dutta, who explicitly said that engaging the local communities in reflecting some issues and including the local arts and crafts to state certain problematics. This is what this platform will be doing. It will be reflecting and speaking from local Tajgani representatives themselves as active participants of this project. Collection of works of art will tell a different story of Taj Mahal, the story of the people living in its shadow. Through various tools of assessment and interpretation, this platform will be an opportunity for locals to share their experiences for further discussion. Works of art becoming sources of communication between population and World Heritage Site management. It will display Tajgani's peoples as main subjects of the narrative, reflecting their interests, needs, and worries. Their histories and culture. It will reflect the feel of neglected local communities next to dominating Taj Mahal. This narrative will become a platform for Agra's and broader India's minority voices to be heard. It will be a plea for attention, effective management, and revised approach to World Heritage properties. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane, for your presentation. I think it was already picking up inputs from the previous panels, so I thank you very much for that. Now, I mean, to wrap up about the call for participation, I mean, this entire process, I would like to invite Professor Sofia Labadi, who is, by the way, directing the overall process, to give a few words about it.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to thank everybody for having presented their contributions. So just to give a background, we're in the middle of the call for participation. We had a first submissions, and then we've asked people to, based on their abstract, to submit a full contribution, and there'll be a final selection by the panel. I think it's in June, with some prize giving, but it was already great to hear some of you speaking. Thank you very much. I just wanted to summarize maybe a few ideas. So what we see here is that the focus on monument is really, really problematic. And I can see two types of violence that all of the participants have been talking about. Physical violence, particularly against women, as highlighted in the project Stories, a case of conservation site schools in Ahmedabad, and the video on the tambores encantados in Brazil. And then we just heard the issue of the violence, I think, between locals and international tourists in the case of the Taj Mahal. And then there's also symbolic violence in the case of the Brazilian workers whose work has not been recognized, and whose narrative and history is always related to the monumental, but not really to their own work. And then the symbol of violence in also the marginalization of Afro-Brazilians. And of course, as we just heard with Jen, the violence in the exclusion of locals, as in the case of the Taj Mahal. But what all of those entries also show is the possibility to empower people. We've heard quite clearly the possibility to empower women through heritage, both tangible and intangible heritage. I think that was quite pregnant in the cases of the first video, but it was so called tambores encantados. And then we've also heard from Daniela, all of the work that has been done to provide counter spaces, to give voice to marginalized histories on their own terms, and not only in relation to the official narrative on monumentality, as in the case of Brasilia, but also in the case of Ahmedabad. And also we've heard, that's my final point, the importance of digital approaches, as Jane Strojkova stressed, the importance of digital approaches to provide counter-narrative and to give voices to silenced people. And I think it's really important to work with those new platforms as well to provide us counter-narrative. So thank you very, very much. Very, very great and engaging presentation. I look forward to receiving your final entries. Great, thank you very much. That's all from me. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Labadi. I don't know if there is any question from the attendees or from the panelists and so on. So if they want to address any question each other. Otherwise, we go on with the program, which is now entering the last part. Any question? Yes, Professor Smith, please.
I have one question to each of them, and it's the same question. What was the hardest part? What was the most challenging? What was the thing that you thought would fall over?
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Please.
Well, thanks. So I think for us, the most difficult part was, as I was saying, that the mosque that we've started working in is located in an area where there are no believers that live around. And when we did our first couple of collective meetings, there were questions about our intentions and why are we, because it's not something that is usually done. So our intentions from all communities, the believers asked us why we were, would we do anything that would desecrate the spirituality of the place. And the people otherwise who were living around, they asked us, are we trying to create any kind of religious, are we creating a specific religious bias here? So I think the most difficult part was the fact that most of these communities were speaking from the current political rhetoric of the country and the place, and for us to constantly kind of deconstruct that and kind of talk about our intentions in a way that we bring out that in a way that we do not come across as people with stakes other than what we intend to do was the most difficult part for us. And I think I think only a long-term continuous engagement can, when the communities see us constantly working in that place without any other intention, that's the only way of managing that, is what we have realized. There's no amount of discussions, but actions can only respond to that, is what we have realized.
I wanted to add, to answer the question as well. I think we had a similar problem within our project, because obviously we're working in a collaborative group with designers and visual artists who are also not part of Indian groups or part of being Indian native people. So for us, it's important to earn people's trust and also show them that we are genuinely interested in the issue, and it's not just another commercial project for us, and especially because we are dealing with sensitive issues such this whole problematic with the Taj Mahal is a sensitive issue for some. Doing interviews and bringing all those ethical and moral approaches to those interviews without causing further damage or making people upset, basically. I think those are our main points to focus on.
Yeah, okay. In my research, I think my difficulty was to deal with the fact that the workers need to embody this heroic identity in order to get a place in Brasilia. And I still want to understand how they actually feel about it.
Thank you. That's very interesting. So for Jinya and Jane, it was really trust, and for Daniela, for you, it was understanding. You obtaining a deep understanding. Thank you.
Yeah, in my case, is bringing awareness about the history, because it's also a sensitive place. We are talking about the history of slavery here in Brazil, in Rio. So it's a memory site, and so how we can create this narrative in a way that people can have more awareness about all the consequences and legacy of slavery in Brazil, but also understand the contribution of Afro-Brazilians in our society as well.
So in a sense, do no harm.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting because heritage is such a powerful thing, and we have such capacity to do good, and yet we could also, there's the possibility of hurting people without even really knowing it. Thank you. They were all very interesting answers.
Well, I should say thank you all for your contributions, also for panel 4 and panel 5. Now it's time for closing up, wrapping up, and seeing all the faces that were behind this magnificent month of March. Very intriguing, I would say. So Luz, Carl, I would say also Suramian, but mostly Toki. We have two Toki. We have two Toki, and then all the people that are also there. I mean, Tony and so on. So maybe Toki, I give you the floor.
I would like to say that this has been, the last 2 days have been amazing, and I would like to say a big thank you to Sophia Labadi for bringing me on board, and Luz as well, who's on board. So we're all three co-conveners, and Sophia's the coordinator for diversities and gender. And it's been a ride, and the team has been amazing, 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 amazing. Thank you, Marco, for coming on board, because I sort of dragged you into this and said, come join us. And thank you to all the people behind. Liz, are you going to come in and help me? And to all the students, people behind all of this, Olufemi, Paloma, Fernande, Elisa, Merv, Francesca, Carl, Maya, Ama, John, Kea, Suramya, Tony, Alihaz, did I pronounce that well? She's letting me drown, isn't she? Luca.
Our technical team, yes, in Slovenia, Alihaz and Luca.
Yes, the entire team, you guys are simply amazing. And Sophia's competition that she organized, that's wow, well done. Liz webinars, amazing, amazing, amazing. You can check out the links. We have the links out already on YouTube. And yes, I did the conference. Oh gosh, I don't know what I was thinking, but yes, it's been a good ride. Great banter out there, and I think Lewis would take it from here.
Well, I think the only thing you left me is to say thank you, Toki.
Let's not forget,
all the involved organizations for supporting it. Nova Gorica, Newcastle University, Kent University. We are super grateful, of course, for everyone who has supported this in financial or organizational or, human ways. It has been super, super good. Thank you all.
And to all our panelists, you guys were just, oh my God, you rocked it. You rocked it. And to the moderators, oh my gosh, well done. Well done. It was fabulous. Thank you.
I think we still need to leave some space for John to say his last word.
Yes. And Sophia.
Should I just say thank you to both Turkey and Luz, who've done so much work, and the team behind. I was often the last one to do anything. So I just wanted to say thank you very, very much for holding the fort, as they say in English. But this is not the end. We'll continue. Obviously, the call for participation and the entry is still going on, so that you'll be hearing more from us. And next year is the big year of the 50th anniversary of the convention, so there'll be a lot more going on. But now it's time for celebration. And just thank you again for the team. Thank you, Luz, for the wonderful webinars. I've learned so much. And Toki, the conference was really, really amazing. It's one of the best conferences I've been to recently. Obviously, I'm totally not objective, but I've learned so much. I've taken so many notes. And it was also trying to move away from so much we've heard about World Heritage, trying to break new ground, and I think you've really succeeded in doing that, both in the conference and in the webinars. And I wanted to congratulate you both for being able to do that. And I had no input in that, so I won't take any of the congratulations for myself. But
she's been very modest, I assure you.
It was absolutely fabulous. So thank you very much, and I hope the participants felt the same way as well. And the contributors the panelists were absolutely amazing. So thank you. Yeah, awesome panelists I can read. Yeah, it was really, 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 really fabulous. Yeah. Both yesterday and today. Great stuff. And the webinars also, so many different topics, so many different people. And what I liked the most also was a lot of people from the global south that we don't hear a lot about, especially in World Heritage. It was great to have so many people. So many of those unheard voices. So let's keep on the good work. Great. So I think John is talking now.
Yes.
Let me introduce John. Yeah, John is an historical anthropology graduate student at the University of the West Indies, Mona in Jamaica, and is specializing in archaeology and cultural heritage. You get, of course, a longer bio of John in the chat. And now I give the floor to John for the wrap up. Thanks a lot, John, and thanks to all of you.
Thanks a lot, Marco. There isn't really much for me to say. With Luz, Sophia, and Tuki, those are very good expressions of gratitude. I just want to say thanks for bringing me on board. I'm pretty sure all the other students and everybody else that contributed to the conference feels the same way. Thanks to all our panelists, our moderators, today's keynote speaker. And yeah, this just brings us to the end of a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful 2-day conference and at the end of a fantastic month of presentations and discussions. There's much more to come. You can find the other events on our events page. Follow us on social media to keep updated. And I think that's it.
Okay. So good. I don't think I'm the right one to say the last words about that, but we said a lot. Maybe, I don't know, either you want to be the one, Toki, to say goodbye?
Let me say goodbye at 12:46 a.m. from Australia. I'll now go to bed.
Goodbye at 10 a.m. from New York. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. It's been a blast. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.